Today I want to take a look at a few games from the first round of the Tall Memorial Tournament that is currently being played in Russia. So the first game is Kramnik versus Shirov. Shirov has just sacrificed his bishop on g3 and in the process has gained 3 of White's kingside pawns. Now of course he hopes to create some kind of attack against White's king. But he shouldn't forget that both his rooks are in their initial positions and the bishop on b7 is also not really participating in the attack yet. So I suppose both players knew what they were doing and Kramnik now played queen h5, attacking f7. And much to my surprise, Shirov did not defend the f7 square, for instance by means of g6, but he played the, to my opinion, rather weak rook a5. Now this attacks of course White's queen, but Kramnik now crashed through on f7, regaining one of his lost pawns, and of course also this means that Black can no longer castle now. So king e8 is forced, and even though Black now has the threat of queen h4 check with a double attack on White's king and White's bishop, Kramnik can quite easily defend this with bishop g2. But after rook g5 and queen f3, Kramnik managed to stave off the attack and went on to win this endgame fairly easy, also because of the fact that I have a strong feeling that Shirov did not manage to defend this endgame in the most tenacious way. Okay, so let's go over to the next game. Okay, the next game is Morozevich-Alexeyev, and we have reached the position after White's 16th move. Now I noticed a very interesting subtlety in this position. In this position, of course, Alexeyev's knight on f6 is attacked, and he moved it to e4 right away. But we will see that it was probably more accurate to first play bishop takes f2 check, and only after the rook recaptures, then to play knight e4. Now there could follow knight takes e4, queen takes e4, sorry, d takes e4, queen d4, and now after an exchange on d4 we have reached the game position, but with a small difference, and the difference being the fact that White's rook is now here on f2. It also means that White's rook cannot go to c1 as happened later in the game, and of course it also means that White's king is not able to go to the center immediately, which was possible in the game. So back to 16 e5, where Alexeyev immediately played knight e4, probably a slight error. Now there followed a similar trade down, knight takes e4, d takes e4, and now it's White's move, bishop takes c5, queen c5 check, and again queen d4, and the exchange of queens here in the center. But we will see now that this position is more advantageous than the one we just saw in the analysis. Bishop e6 was now played by Alexeyev, of course looking to go to the central d5 square. Morozevich now chases the bishop, and he has a very nice central pawn duo here. Also this guy, of course, is quite nice. So bishop d5 followed, and here we can see the difference. King f2 was possible. So, and after rook fc8, of course trying to set in motion Black's queenside majority, it was possible for Morozevich to immediately activate his rook with rook fc1. Now, imagine that move would not have been possible when this rook would have been on f2. It's a funny thing. Okay, rook c6 was now played, and a4 was now played. Morozevich, of course, tries to clamp down here on Black's queenside majority. Rook ac8 was played, and rook c3 was played. Rook b6 now followed, rook a2 protecting, king f8, And I suppose that the position is still pretty much in balance. But from this moment on, Alexeyev starts to play slight inaccuracies, and Morozevich seizes his opportunity very nicely. King e3, nice to centralize the king like that. King e7, and now Morozevich starts to execute a small plan. I suppose white has the upper hand here, and it has to do with the fact that this pawn is weak and that this pawn is also weak, and that it is also quite easy for white's pieces to attack those pawns. And another very important factor is, of course, the centralization of white's position. These pawns are very strong, and when we compare the kings, I suppose that white's king is also a little bit better than black's, because of the fact that, well, black's of course has a problem moving forward, and white's is already attacking this pawn here on e4. Now, black is also not without chances, because he has an active rook. This guy is active, and at least for the moment ties down the a2 rook to the defense of the b2 pawn. But we will see later that Morozevich exploits a tactic in a very nice way, and he manages to exchange his weak rook for black's strong rook and remains with the winning position. Okay, here's the beginning of the plan. Bishop d1. Now this bishop of course wants to go to c2, where it can attack the e4 pawn and would simply win the e4 pawn. Also, it can do some nice things along this diagonal here. Now rook a6 was played, and now probably, objectively speaking, the strongest move would have been bishop c2, attacking the pawn on e4. But it is quite possible, knowing Morozevich, the brilliant strategic and fighting player he is, it's quite possible that he saw a trick here. He didn't play bishop c2, but after rook a6 played rook a1, probably provoking black's next move. And it is possible that Alexeyev didn't see Morozevich's brilliant reply. Now, of course, it looks very logical to play b5, which is what Alexeyev did. At the moment, it's not possible for white to take this pawn, because this rook is pinned. So why play this stupid move, rook a2 to a1? Well, because of the fact that Morozevich now has the very strong b4. And in playing this move, he also makes use of a pin, because it is not possible for black to play en passant now, because there is another rook here, also unprotected, in black's camp. Very funny stuff. And, of course, with the pawn here, he threatens to push this pawn, when white would have a very strong queenside position round of this pawn, and probably emerge with a rather simple winning double rook endgame. Okay, so Alexeyev was forced now to break open this queenside position here, but chess is not checkers, and we don't have to recapture the pawn on a4 immediately. No, Morozevich first attacked the black rook with b5. This strong has suddenly emerged a very strong one, coming from b2, ending up on b5. Now there followed rook a5, and rook a4 was played, and of course Alexeyev did not want to allow rook takes b5, rook takes a7 check, when white's rook would be very dominant on the 7th rank, but he felt obliged now to exchange his active rook for a rook that was rather passive, only a few moves before. Okay, so now if we take another look at the position, this bishop has become much more active. This rook already was still active. This pawn has also become a weakness. This pawn is also still weak. And of course this pawn is also quite weak. But if we balance everything up, white now is clearly better and has a winning position. Okay, Alexeyev tried to stir up some trouble with f6 here, but Morozevich was not distracted. He played bishop c2, attacking the weakness on e4. There was an exchange now in the center, like this, and rook c5 followed. This attacks the b5 pawn, but Morozevich plays rook a3, attacking a weak pawn also, and now there was an exchange of weak pawns, and finally white has also managed to bring his rook to the 7th, and he has a decisive advantage now. King f8, the black king must go back, and that's the big difference, of course, with his white counterpart. The white king on e3 is very strong and actively placed in the center. Now e6 was played, threatening e7, and if then king e8, then of course bishop a4 would win black's rook. So Alexeyev tried to defend here with bishop b7, blocking the 7th rank, but after e7 check and king takes e7, black is lost anyway, because after bishop e4 it is not black's rook that is in danger, but black's bishop. It is attacked 2 times by the rook and the bishop, of course. It is pinned, it cannot move because of the king here, and it's only defended once, so white has a simple winning position. Okay, now let's go on to the 3rd game. Okay, here we have it, the 3rd game, Ivanchuk versus Kamsky. It's the position after black's 32nd move, knight b8. And of course, if we look at the position, we can see all these black squares being on the back rank, or at least in black's camp. And if we compare them with white's pieces, then we can see that white is having a much more active position, and he is also a pawn up. This guy is here. So after a game in which there were, I think, a lot of mistakes and inaccuracies, Ivanchuk finally has managed to get the better of Kamsky, and he decides matters here with the interesting move knight d8. Now this threatens the deadly check here on f7, of course, but it also blocks black's defense from the queen and the rook to the knight on b8, so there's also the threat of queen takes b8. Well, there is no defense left, and the final few moves were queen b5 check, king g1, and I suppose both players were in time trouble. It had been a very, very complicated game, and Kamsky now allows a quick mate. Had he seen it coming, I suppose he would have tried and defend the f7 square like this with rook f8, but still, after knight takes f7 check and king g8, it would have simply been winning for white after a move like knight d8, for instance. Anyway, after king g1 he played h6, and he must have missed knight f7 check, king h7, and now queen c2. Very nice retreat by Ivanchuk, checking the king here, and there's really only one move left, but it's a non-move, because after queen d3, queen takes d3 is checkmate, of course. Okay, well, the other 2 games ended in, well, let's say, rather uneventful, quite balanced draws, even though I found the game between Ponomariov and Gelfand rather interesting. I'm always interested to see these Petrov games. You know, everybody says they are the death for chess because they were so drawish, but the line with knight takes c3 or knight c3, knight takes c3 is always very interesting because of opposite castles. What's the right English for that? Anyway, you know what I mean. So to round up these short game analysis, Shirov surprised with rook a5, simply allowing queen takes f7, and Kramnik went on to win the endgame. So after that we had a look at Morozevich-Alexeyev. Very nice win by Morozevich. Probably it also had to do with the fact that he plays an opening that is not well known, and that Alexeyev had to defend from move 1, so to say. And in the end we looked at Ivanchuk-Kamsky, a game that went up and down, but in the end Ivanchuk managed to overcome Kamsky, taking revenge for his loss in Sochi just, what was it, 1 or 2 weeks ago. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this small discussion of the first round with Tsar Memorial in Russia. I suppose we'll be back this week to cover some other rounds. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.